All right, so continuing our discussion of harmony and vertical slices of notes, or what we call a chord, there are three issues that kind of creep in with harmony that are unique to harmony. Doubling, spacing, and dispositions. So let's examine each of these, and a couple of them are related, but let's look at each of these. So first of all, doubling. Doubling is what happens when we need to have two voices on the same note. They are doubling the note. And if we take a look at a chord, for example, C major chord, there we go, C, E, G right down there. You can see if I have three voices, I could easily have a C and an E and a G, and each voice has one member of that chord, and therefore it just sounds great. Or, more often the case, we have like two C's and an E, but we have those nice sounds. When I have four voices, suddenly we need to have a fourth voice doubling a note, because I have three notes to give among four voices. So I could theoretically have two voices on a C and one on an E and one on a G, or one on a C, two on an E, one on a G, or a C and an E and then two Gs. For now, it's easiest to just remember, we'll learn the nuance of things, but for now it's easiest to just remember you're generally okay doubling the bass. Harmony is all about that bass, so if you double the bass, it's generally a good idea. The nuanced version is you double whatever is necessary to make good lines for each of the voices. But for now, just double the bass and you'll be okay until I tell you otherwise in a future lesson. Spacing is another thing that we worry about. We have overtones that kind of guide us on how spacing should work. And as you can see by looking at the overtone series, we have a lot of space on the bottom. C to C, there's an octave. C to G, a fifth. G to C, a fourth. Then it starts getting narrower. C, E, C, G, E, G, C, D, E. We get closer and closer spacing as we go up the overtone series there. And so similarly, when we're voicing a chord, we want to keep that spacing generally intact in that fashion. We really don't care. We really don't care how far it is between the bass and the next voice above the bass. The bass is going to have plenty of overtones carrying. It's going to sound great. We don't need to have anything close. In fact, if we do have something squished in close to the bass, it's going to start sounding muddy because you'll have both of them putting out overtones that you can hear. So leave plenty of distance between your bass note and the other voices of the chord. As you can see as we go up top, things like to be close together. The standard rule of thumb is never that there be more than an octave between your upper voices. So your soprano to your alto, don't exceed an octave. Alto to tenor, don't exceed an octave. Personally, I like to keep them closer than that. Well, we're going to talk about dispositions in a moment, and there are some dispositions that, I like better than other dispositions. I just do. Nobody cares how far it is between the bass and the tenor. Nobody cares. Keep that distance nice and spaced out. Don't have things close together down below and spaced up on top. Think of overtones as your model for how to space a chord. Lots of space on the bottom, things close together up top. It will sound great every time as a result, just because of overtones. And then our last thing we're going to talk about is a little bit of disposition and some notation style as well with these dispositions. So let's pop over here and back to Note Flight and get to look at some dispositions. All right, I have here some dispositions. I've kind of got two categories of dispositions, what we call a close position chord and an open position chord. And the thing that makes something close versus open is how much space you have between the upper voices. Again, remember, nobody cares about the space between the bass and the next voice up. We're talking about the spacing between the upper voices. So you can see here, I can't put any more notes of a C chord in between these. E, C, G, there's no room to put any notes in between. C, E, G, E, G, C, G, C, E. There's no more room. I can't shove notes in the middle of those other notes and still have it be a C chord. So those are close dispositions. There's no spacing in there at all. As opposed to look at the wide spacing over here in open disposition chords. I could stick a C in between that G and the E. I could stick a G in between the E and the C. I've got plenty of space between those voices. And let's just take a listen to all of these chords, and you can hear the difference in sound quality between close disposition and open disposition. You may have heard that the open disposition just takes up more space and fills out the register a little bit more. It's a fairly subtle nuance, but one thing to keep in mind about close disposition versus open disposition: close disposition is much easier to play if you're playing this on a piano, unless you have Rachmaninoff-sized hands, and most of us don't. I don't like to have a lot of space. Like an octave is about as far as my hand will stretch. I can usually play an octave. If I get down to the edge of the keys and stretch, I can maybe hit a tenth. But I like writing close disposition if I'm going to play anything on the piano, just because I don't have large hands. And so I'm not Rachmaninoff. I'm not Michael Jordan. I can't palm a basketball like that. And so I like close disposition when I'm writing things for piano. For a choir, you might like the open disposition and getting the space in between the different voices of the choir. You're always choosing your dispositions based on the instruments you're writing. And again, if you're writing good lines that are characteristic of the ranges of each of your instruments, the music's going to sound great. What I have here is what we call a keyboard style writing. And keyboard style, we have the bass down here so that we can play the bass with our left hand, and then the right hand is playing the chords. And it's a very standard style of writing. Stile accompagnamento is what I often like to refer to it. It's the accompaniment style. If you've got a melody, somebody's singing a song, for example, or playing the trombone, and you're just writing a nice homophonic texture, which is melody plus accompaniment, stile accompagnamento is a great way to write an accompaniment to a melody. And we'll look at some pieces that have, accompaniment style later on in the semester. The other type of writing that we tend to do with four voices is what's called chorale style, or SATB. And this is so called because you can see I've got my soprano and my alto up on the treble clef, and I've got my tenor and my bass down on the bass clef. This is exactly the same dispositions that I was just showing you in keyboard style. It's just that it's written in a chorale style. And this is if you're thinking more of things in a choir type setting where you're writing the different voices. Personally, like I said, I like keyboard style. I'm just not coordinated enough as a trombonist whose main instrument does things like this. I'm not good at thinking about multiple things here. And so if I'm trying to figure out two voices with my left hand and two voices with my right hand at the same time, I'm just not a good enough pianist to handle that. I can usually handle a bass line moving and hit some chords in the right hand. I've done some jazz piano in my life, and partimento works well for me. But I'm not great at playing choir music or hymns or anything in a chorale style. It just overloads my mental filters too quickly. But that's what SATB looks like if you're ever going to be working in a choir setting. Again, remember to be writing good lines for each voice. Don't get distracted entirely by the vertical, and things will sound good.